provide orientation to the Shakti cluster and present the initial explanation of how to use the Shakti cluster as an app, I'm providing this short talk. And the talk runs in parallel, more or less, with the video content consisting of this image of the Shakti cluster, as well as other images that may be incorporated into the montage as I proceed. Now, the first point I want to make to all of you is extremely important. The first point is extremely crucial in your orientation to this design. In order to come to this design with a clear and open mind and with a sober awareness that is capable of learning what this design represents, you need to register two impressions. If you do not register these initial impressions, merely upon gazing at the Shakti cluster icon, if you wish to call it that, merely by gazing at it, in the beginning, at the first encounter, and also at other encounters later on, you need to register, all of you, the very same impressions. And these impressions are dual. In fact, there is a dual and simultaneous impression. First of all, you look at this form, you look at the points on it and the numbers without really knowing what any of it means, without really knowing what any of it signifies. You register the oval shape, the indent in the oval, the floating point, the floret, which may remind you of an inverted pentagram. Indeed, doesn't it rather look like the floral form of an inverted pentagram? And all of that floats before your gaze, and it produces in your mind, it ought to produce, a dual impression. In the first place, what you see looks familiar to you in a certain way. But in another way, it doesn't look familiar. It looks baffling, and it looks like something that you have never ever seen before. So I advise you strongly to allow yourself to register both of these impressions as you gaze at the icon, the design, the mandala, the yantra of the Shakti cluster. Now let me begin by talking about what is familiar to you about this design. Well, it's the oval shape. It has the shape of an oval or an ellipse. Does not have the shape of a perfect circle. So it doesn't resemble the flower of life, which is a well-known design much discussed in New Age metaphysics. No, it doesn't resemble the flower of life. It doesn't resemble the four intersecting circles that represent or that provide the infrastructure for the Kabbalistic tree of life. It doesn't replicate or resemble any perfectly circular geometrical symbol that you've seen, does it? It's an oval, and the oval is in a way familiar, but it has properties which, at first encounter, lie beyond your immediate grasp. So the oval, the ellipse, is easy to see, and this particular ellipse has very specific properties. Each ellipse has a major axis and a minor axis. Right here somewhere would be the center of the ellipse, and these are the two foci of the ellipse. And the ellipse has a minor axis and a major axis, and the proportion of those axes determines the shape of the ellipse, whether it's fat or whether it's thin. The proportion of the shape, or the proportion of the relation of the two axes of the Shakti cluster, is 0.71. So if you take this distance from the apex of the ellipse down to the lowest point and consider it a unit of 1, then this distance of the semi-major axis, as I believe it's also called, is 0.71. And this property of 0.71 is tremendously important. So all accurate representations of the Shakti cluster should be devised and constructed upon that proportion. Now, regardless of what its properties may be, and there is much for you to learn about these points and about the way they're distributed, you see a certain kind of symmetry in these points. 3, 2, 6, 4, 7, 5, 8, 10. You observe symmetry in a balance. There's a balance within, 14, 15. There's a really strong vertical axis, 17, 1, 18, 16, 13, 9. And you note other properties as well. And as you note these baffling and novel properties of the Shakti cluster, you are at the same time comforted or reassured, I might dare to say, by the familiarity of the oval. You've seen ovals before. The oval or the ellipse, well, what is it? Well, it's a universal form that may be less popular than the circle. It may not have been as hyped as the circle, but nevertheless, it is a universal archetypal form of the natural world. Now, the circle is widely hyped as the symbol of perfection and the template of all forms, the perfect circle. Yet, the oval is sort of the less known sister of the circle. She's sort of the sister who lingers in the background, but she becomes more attractive and intriguing as you take notice of her. Kepler determined that the orbits of the planets around the Sun describe ellipses and not perfect circles. Of course, those ellipses are in fact something like conic sections plotted in the space of perfect circular vortices. So there are perfect circular vortices operating in the infrastructure of the cosmos, but the manifesting or materializing properties of the cosmos happen to appear strongly in connection with this oval form. So the orbits of the planets, including the Earth, and the orbit of the Moon around the Earth are ellipses or ovals. And there is a point when the Moon is closer to the Earth and the Moon is more distant from the Earth. And these points can be observed. When you go and take a look at the realm of sacred art, well, what do you discover? Well, it turns out that there are many, many examples of spectacular mandalas using the perfect circle. And these mandalas and designs of sacred geometry, as it is called, also use sections and divisions of that circle, and they tend to emphasize the golden section or the divine proportion, which is 1 to 1.618 or 1 to 0.618, which propagates logarithmic spirals and propagates pentagonal structures from a perfect circle. Well, does the Shakti cluster does it incorporate also these properties that can be found in the perfect circle? Well, you can find them there if you want to look for it, but it's more interesting, I would advise, to set that consideration aside and leave your mind open to discover what are the actual properties unique and inherent to the ellipse or oval, and in particular to this ellipse. Now you'll find that in the realm of sacred art and sacred geometry, the ellipse is also widely represented. You have, of course, the Vesica Pisces. You have, of course, the design of the ellipse seen in stained glass windows and those forms of art. And there are, in fact, countless examples that one could cite. One that comes to mind is a painting from the artwork of Hildegard of Bingen, which vividly illustrates an oval shape. And many of the ovals, such as those that were represented in the work of Hildegard of Bingen, call to mind, of course, the Hindu or Asian imagery of the yoni, of the female organ of generation, as it is oddly called. It is, of course, also an organ of pleasure as well as an organ of generation. And so it's no surprise to many of you that universally this oval shape has been represented and replicated in countless images, in sacred art, ritual art, in magical and yantric designs that refer to the divine feminine, the yoni, the matrix of the universe, the vortex of the Shakti, of the Divine Mother, and so forth and so on. And so anyone who goes into this area of study, anyone who delves into it, will immediately learn that according to the ancient Asian conception of the dynamics of the cosmos, everything is created by paired forces, by gendered aeons, to put it in Gnostic terms, gendered aeons, paired forces, which are vortical or spiraling currents of plasma, or Birkeland currents, as they are now known in the cosmology of the electric universe. And it's known that these Birkeland currents are gendered. They have male and female characteristics. And so you have the primordial duality of Shiva and Shakti. So here you have, in the Shakti cluster, properly named, a cluster of the powers that are inherent to the divine Shakti. But not merely to the divine Shakti, or the mother materializing force of the universe, but also to the specific telluric or earth-bound properties of the Shakti. So the most precise, direct, and simple definition of the Shakti cluster oval is this. It is a design that represents the powers inherent in the telluric matrix of Shakti. The telluric matrix of the divine Shakti is nothing but the field of nature and of the planetary environment in which you are embedded. All that lives from the microbial level up to the level of the great animals, the human animals, the millions of species of insects, serpents, birds, all the way up to the greatest sized living animals, the seagoing mammals, the great blue whale and so forth. All of those creatures live in the terrestrial matrix. And if you want a symbolic design or an iconic replication of that matrix, well, there you have it. So all of that would be familiar to you. All of that, I think, would ring a bell. All of those descriptions and variations of the oval and the ellipse would not be difficult for you to detect in this design. And yet, there is something about this design, there are features of this design that you have never, ever seen or encountered ever before. And so the second impression, which comes with the first, and I advise you to hold the two impressions together. The second impression, is really the gateway to your deep connection with this device. The Shakti cluster is not merely a design, it is also a device. It is a tool. And the properties of the tool are apparent to you at first glance. The properties of the tool are apparent in the way that these 18 dots are arranged and the way that they are colored. Black around the oval, dark red on the rosette, a unique blue dot, a unique amber dot, and a unique hollow dot. All of these details of the Shakti cluster point directly to its dynamic properties. They have to do with the way that it works. So what I advise you to do, before we get directly to the question of, hey, how does it work, is to just float the design in your gaze. Just float it and just look at it and contemplate it with a clear and open mind. As you do so, I need to advise you of one thing that you must certainly not do. While you note the numbers on the 18 points, 1, 11, 14, 16, 9, you cannot help noting the numbers, okay? While you note the numbers, well, pay attention to how the numbers locate dots on the design. But do not attribute any significance whatsoever to those numbers. For instance, the number 1 locates a dot in a really unique position on the design, doesn't it? The numbers 4, 5, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 3, and 2 locate points on the oval. But the number 1 locates a point in the indent of the oval that is not actually connected directly with the oval. Likewise, the number 17 identifies a point that floats in the head of the oval. At the point where the oval would be completed, it floats, but it floats freely like a bead. Imagine it like a trembling bead that is held in this position in the indent at the head of the oval. Note the numbers in order to identify the positions. 9, the number 9, has this position. 13 has this position. Notice how 9 and 13 are closely connected on the vertical axis, as are 1 and 17. Just note those features, but above all, do not attribute any kind of numerological or Kabbalistic gematria significance to the numbers. The numbers are simply there. They do have a significant sequence that you will come to learn in turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's a sequence of 10 in black on the boundary of the ellipse. There is a sequence of 5 in red, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. On the floret, and there are others on the vertical axis. And those numbers are significant as locational devices, but do not attribute to them any significance whatsoever, numerologically speaking. And do not, I emphasize, do not by any means apply Kabbalistic formulas of gematria and number symbolism to the Shakti cluster. That would be a complete waste of your time. So at the 20-minute point, I'd like to proceed as rapidly as I can in telling you how this design works and how you can use it as a tool of autogenic magic.